Good morning, you crazy fishermen. We're headed to Lake of the Ozarks, and it is January the 9th, 10th. I don't know what day it is. We're going to try to catch some bass on a jerkbait today. Hopefully we can do that, and then we will also try to catch some crappie. We'll just kind of see what's going on down there. It is supposed to be 58 degrees at Osage Beach today in January. So normally on days like today I don't do as well because the weather is nice. I do better on the crappier, windier days. But I am not going to miss an opportunity to go fishing on a January day where it's almost going to be 60 degrees. So stay tuned. Let's see what happens. All right, we are back. We're on our way back home from putting the smack down on some crappies at Lake of the Ozarks. So we want to record what was the conditions. The water temperature was 42 degrees. It got warmer as the day went on. 45 degrees was the warmest water that I found. The wind direction was south, pretty much straight south wind, and I think it was 5 to 8 degrees on the forecast app, but there was actually, if you were in a place where it had a long ways to build up, there was a 10 to 15 miles an hour wind out on the water, really. So it's throughout the afternoon it kind of picked up, which when we first got on the water it was dead calm, and the fish would come look at your jerkbait but they wouldn't take it. But that was kind of the way that they were going throughout the day, and I don't know why, but the crappie were either on secondary points or in brush. There were some on main lake docks. The great big schools were on main lake docks, but they didn't really bite as good as the fish that were on the secondary points. If you had a secondary point that was a lot flatter with kind of a subtle drop off in that 15-foot range, it's almost like a lot of people are catching them in open water out in the middle of the coves, and I did not catch them like that. I had to be on a secondary point. If it had brush around it, that was okay, but I caught the majority of the crappie on rock, not really in the brush. So I would just graph and look for any kind of crappie, any kind of shad, any kind of, with your graphs you're looking for the shadows, you're looking for them really grouped up well, and you're not necessarily looking just straight for brush, because I'm used to looking for brush all the time, so that was a little bit different for me. And it was good to go ahead and catch a few in open water like that, just off rock. And I think that if you were going out tomorrow, you might catch some on main lake docks, and then you might catch some on maybe some secondary points with rock transitions. You just gotta hunt and peck and go around and try to find them each and every day. And it kind of depends on which way the wind's blowing that positions the shad. We didn't catch them where there was shad all the time, but if there was shad in that area, then it really helped, and the fish were more aggressive around the shad. If you found a brush pile that had a smaller school on them, the fish would come up and nip at your bait, and they were really hard to catch. But if you had more fish in the school and shad around, I guess it created more competition, and I don't know, it just seemed like they were easier to catch and they were more apt to eat a bigger jerkbait. So the best baits: DD pointer, Lucky Crab DD pointer 78. That's the deep 78. It gets to about 6 to 8 feet. I like to weight mine. Right now they wanted to come up to the bait. They did not necessarily want a bait that was sinking. We haven't really got to the water temperature where it's super cold, where they want that bait sinking in their face yet. So they wanted to come up to the bait. So you wanted a pointer pretty much straight right out of the package. I also caught several fish on a DD 100 Lucky Craft, kind of catching them on our old school. It's funny to call them old school. Rogues are old school to me, but I've had these pointers for 20 years now, so I guess you can call them old school too. The Mega Bass 110, Vision 110 +1. That was a great bait today, and Northern Effect, that's kind of a collector's color. Probably should not even be throwing it, but I don't really collect baits. I get them and I fish them. So that's a translucent, it's, I don't even know how to describe it. You'll have to look up that color. It's got kind of a pinkish belly, kind of translucent, purplish black back. It's a great color, but it's very hard to describe. On the Lucky Craft, we're catching them on it looks like a sexy shad, chartreuse shad. It's basically white with a little chartreuse line down the side. Chartreuse shad. We caught some on clown. I thought American shad was going to start working because they were really interested in it and they were coming up and grabbing it. We're getting close to it and I could see them on the live scope. But we did not boat a fish off of the American shad, which is usually one of my best colors. It seemed like they wanted something with a little bit of color to it, a little bit of chartreuse, which is typical of the crappie. And the other, we didn't really have time, or we didn't need to try any other colors, so caught most of them on that chartreuse shad, which is typical. I thought maybe a flashy color would work, but the jig heads, crappie jig heads, your 1/8 ounce pill head, pink with monkey milk, baby garland, baby shad on it, bobby garland. It was the jig that we used whenever we could not get them to come up and bite the jerkbait. That is a staple, and we're throwing it in straight into the brush, kind of working it over the top of it. There was one pile that I caught 4 or 5 out of on the jig, but it was funny. The open water crappie wanted that jerkbait. The crappie that were in the brush really wanted the jig. I did catch a few over the brush with the jerkbait, but not very many. And we didn't boat very many small ones today. We mostly caught really big crappie in that 12 to 14 inch range. So, and it was probably because of the bait. You know, pointer, a DD pointer 100 is a pretty big bait for a crappie. And some days I just like it, but a lot of big fish. Now, on the bass, so pecking and hunting around these crappie, you're kind of bass fishing at the same time. We did boat 3 bass today, and all of them were under 15 inches. So we did not boat a keeper bass. If we were strictly bass fishing, I think we would just keep on trying the jerkbait. I don't really think switching to a jig or a football jig or a chopper would really help. I just think you have to keep moving until you find where there's a school of bass. On my last stop of the evening, I know it was bass and not crappie, and they were not reacting like crappie at all. There was a smaller school of them. They were in brush, but I'm almost dead certain that they were bass, and they would kind of come up and nose the jerkbait, but they would not commit to it, and they were a lot bigger than the crappie. I'm positive they were bass. So I don't know, today was one of those 60-degree days in January with the sun out, so on those days I don't do as well. I do better on the cloudy, nasty, cold days. So that's the report. 15 foot of water was a magic number. We did catch some crappie shallower in 8 to 12, but 15 seems to be the magic number. Anywhere from the main lake. It seems like if you're on a main lake point or a main lake channel swing, or basically the very first dock that opens up in a cove, there is a lot of fish on that very first dock, bass and crappie. That's a pattern all over the lake, from at mom and dad's at the 50 all the way to, we fished around the 12 to the 8-mile marker today. So, you know, Buck Creek, mouth of the Gravois, Workman's Hollow, all that main lake, and then from the Gravois we put in at White 20 and worked from there to the main lake to about the 8-mile marker. So that area is pretty clear, but you still only have about maybe 4 feet of visibility. So the water's actually clearer up in the glaize and clearer down at the dam, and then of course clearer in the mouth of the Gravois. So when you get out in the main lake, you know, around Buck, there's some, it's still clear, but it's not as clear. Once we get some rain and some snow, all that'll change. But we haven't had any water run through Bagnall in forever, so everything's pretty stable. Really, the only reason that it's got any stain to it whatsoever is we've got a lot of algae growing on the brush piles and all over the rocks, and floats from the docks and poles and cables and all that. It has a lot of algae growing on it. It seems like with the rocks being covered in that stuff, it just kind of gives the water kind of a stain. I don't know how to explain it, but fishing is phenomenal for January. There's guys catching them all over the place. There's guys catching them on crappie jigs, setting their slip corks to, you know, 12, 14, 15, throwing to the piles. A lot of them are using crappie jigs that are hand-tied, marabou. I stick with the old Bobby Garland muscle milk. I mean, you can't beat it. I use crappie nibbles, but probably caught more fish today without crappie nibbles than we did. So it's not super simple. You've got to go up to a pile, and if they're not biting, move on to the next one. We spent a lot of time fishing for fish that we could see with the live scope that were not cooperating. So if they're not cooperating, you don't see them coming up and really biting, you're not getting a lot of feedback, move on to the next one, because right now in the winter time they're probably not feeding all day like in the fall and spring, and if you're not there during their feeding window, then it's very hard to get them to bite. So just move on, find a pile or a wad of them close by. And it's funny that one school will be firing and eating and one will not, and they'll be within 100 yards of each other. It's just kind of the way it is. So keep hunting and pecking. But hopefully this helps. If you got any questions, email me. Hit me up on jared.h.shelton at Instagram, Missouri Fishing Charters at Instagram, J-Rod Shelton on TikTok, got J-Rod Fishing right here on YouTube, and my email is jared.h.shelton@gmail.com. So get out there while the weather's nice, and I will talk to you later.